thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully you've got something out of this, and really excited to hear about kind of from your perspective on the judiciary, and then also as a law professor at the University of Michigan, thinking about some of these problems, kind of, what are the kind of things you'd like to see us doing to try to move the profession forward to solve some of these problems?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And I have no PowerPoint. Sorry. I left when I was, I actually have a little bit of a academic pedigree that I want to refer to first, so that I'm not only here as your sort of connection to the practical world, at least the court world, but I taught at the University of Michigan Law School for 15 years before I was elected to the bench, and I have taught there since then, just one course a year. I have been teaching a appellate practice course, but next year, as Dan referred to, I'm teaching this problem-solving course. The University of Michigan Law School has a new problem-solving curriculum where they pair a law professor with a professor from another discipline. I'm teaching with a computer scientist to frame a problem or identify a problem at the beginning of the term, and then set about figuring out what solutions the class can come up with. It's a class that cross-enrolls across the university, so we'll have law students, business students, engineering students, computer scientists, social work students, you name it, all in one room. I think 18 of them about. And we'll divide them up in 3 teams, and we'll work on the problem. The problem that we are going, my co-teacher and I are going to focus on, and I hope we'll have Dan in a few times to help us, is access to justice. Since I have been serving on the court, figuring out how to basically just run the trains, get the work done of the courts where most people we know have to go do their business. The people that go do their business every day has been what I've been most worried about, the thing that keeps me up at night most of the time. And so it seemed like a great opportunity to combine a couple of my worlds, my academic world with this set of real problems that I would actually like to have some real solutions come out of the class. One of the things that, as I've been sitting here today, that keeps occurring to me is how much I wish there was more cross-pollination within law, and I mean by that across the academy, the private sector, and the public sector. I know there are folks who go back and forth between the big law firms in DC and the highest levels of DOJ, depending on who's in power. And my husband is one of those. He's back at Latham and Watkins now. But we don't see as often people go into sort of state government, where frankly and state courts even, where most of law happens. We don't see as much, maybe this is changing, I hope it is, but you don't see people go through academia into private practice, back into academia. My husband is another one of those. He actually started out as a tenured professor at the University of Michigan. He went into the Obama White House. He went into the Department of Energy, and now he's at Latham. And I feel like the more we are crossing and there's probably other places we should be crossing as well, but I feel like if we could do more of what we're doing here, that would be great. So I applaud you, Dan, for bringing together this diverse group of people. We should be doing more of it. I don't like that when I'm in my law school world, I'm usually only talking to my law school colleagues. When I'm in my court world, I'm only talking to my court colleagues, and we're not talking to each other enough. So nice work doing this. I will also plead guilty to being on the side of disrupting traditional legal education, even though I've been part of it for a long time. When I was a law student at NYU in 1989, 90, 91, I was a research assistant to a guy named Randy Hertz, who was writing the McCrate Report at the time, and I spent a lot of nights up as his research assistant writing the McCrate Report. I wrote that darn thing. I wrote a lot of that thing.
Got a lot of explaining to do.
I know. And then I went and was a public interest lawyer for 5 or 6 years, and then I I got back into law school teaching. I spent 2 years at Yale, and then I spent 15 years at Michigan. And not 15, because now it's 20. It's been a long time. So I believe the academy is like a great place to figure out solutions to problems. I still believe in it, but I believe we have to be talking to lots of other people. So I like a lot of what I've heard today. I'm going to talk today, though, a little bit about now that I'm basically a fireman. I just put out fires all the time. I want to talk a little bit about what I see as the problems facing regular people who use our courts every day that I would love to see solved, and mostly just to throw them out to you smart people who are then going to have time to focus on them, because then I have to go back to writing opinions. I have this other function, the Michigan Supreme Court. You're familiar with our opinion writing function. We do that. We decide in big cases. We had the guns in schools cases last week. We have a lot of legal questions that we have to figure out, and we write opinions on those. But by the Constitution, we are charged with administering the courts of the state. And that turns out to be where we can do the most good for the most people. I mean, because it turns out that on the opinion cases, 50% of the people are happy and 50% of them are unhappy with what we do. But in our administrative function, we have the ability to actually change the way our courts do business, right? Change the way regular people who have to interact with the justice system experience it. And so there's a real advantage there, or I think a real opportunity there to make a difference in people's lives. And if you're going to do public service, if you're going to, go make the big bucks for a while, oh wait. But anyway, you may as well actually try and do some good while you're in it, right? I don't know if I'll do it forever, but while I'm doing it, I want to leave a little bit of a mark and make a difference. And it turns out the administrative docket is where you do it. Having said that, the obstacles are tremendous, and they're not just there's the regular, obstacles of bureaucracy in state government, which I have to say, that I guess the University of Michigan is a public university, so it's sort of state government, but no. I had no idea what, the University of Michigan had all these smart people. I was one of the associate deans for a while. I had all these smart faculty members who would come up with great ideas, and these smart students, and they'd say, I think we could do this, and I'd say, go do it, and they would do it, and it was innovative, maybe not as much as it should be, but there was things were getting done and happening. State government moves a little more slowly. It's a little more harder to wrangle, so many of the staff outlive us, and they know that, and so they know how to deal with us. They know how to deal with my annoying questions. But there are a couple of enormous obstacles that I want to throw out there, just so that we know, so that you know that they're there. And one is structural, and one is empirical. So the structural problem here in Michigan, this isn't true in every state. So some states will have a much easier time with some of the good ideas that you produce, making use of them. In Michigan, we are not a unified court system, so that's a huge problem, right? Because so the Michigan Supreme Court is charged with administering the courts of the state, and yet it's really hard to do it. We have very few carrots and very few sticks because we are not a unified court system. In a unified court system, the state funds all of the operations, and therefore the operations are uniform. They're using the same case management systems, which, as you know, is the way we would actually be able to track and know what we're doing from court to court. We do not. In Michigan, we have 411 trial courts. Each has its own case management system. So the state pays the judges. That's the only thing the state does centrally. Everything else is funded by their local units of government. So city governments, county governments are funding their trial court operations. And as you know, it's a big, diverse state. There's a whole other part of it up here. And they all have every local community has its own priorities and values and things that it cares about in terms of its trial court operations. So they fund, some things very well in some places and not very well in others. And they have these, their own case management systems across the state. 20 of them, there are 27 different systems that we've identified. 27 of them, we call them homegrown. We don't even know what they are. So, that's what we call them. They're just they started putting them together in the 80s and the 90s when the point was only to do business for their own little jurisdiction, right? And they didn't have in mind, maybe we want to be able to communicate with other trial court systems or other units of government, or collect data so we could think about how we could do things better or differently. That wasn't how they grew up. And yet, it's what they have now. When I first got to the court, we had this. I was elected in November of 2012. I started serving in January of 2013, and we were the Department of Justice was investigating 2 trial courts in Michigan for not providing translation services to people who didn't speak English. It was a serious investigation, and we had to respond to it. And so I arrived new on the scene, and the Chief Justice at the time said, like, see, well, you know those DOJ people. My husband was working in the Obama White House. He said, why don't you deal with it? And I was like, all right, I'll deal with it. So I'm like, like naively wander in and say, my colleagues' responses were like, it's really expensive to provide translators to everybody in the state. It's so expensive. It's so expensive. The trial courts will never do it. They're going to yell. They're going to scream. And I was like, well, how expensive is it? Like, tell me how many, how often do we use translators, and what kind of cases? When does it matter? And the data that I got back was zero. Nobody collected any of that information. There wasn't a single trial court in the state who could tell me how regularly, there wasn't a single trial judge who collected the information about how regularly they needed translators, had to call them, how they did it, did they have to call, what languages, could they use language line? There are services you can use. You don't have to always, anymore have to call somebody. No data whatsoever. Making it really hard for me to communicate with DOJ, communicate with the trial courts who I needed to convince that we needed to do this, and communicate with the public interest organizations who were concerned, rightfully concerned about it. I had very few tools, and we basically had to just pass a rule that was the right rule on the merits, with no information about what it was going to end up costing the different courts who had to implement it. Some of them were really mad and defied us for a while, and then we had to sort of deal with the defiant judges. Anyway, this is even more complicated when you imagine how often our courts have to interact with other systems. So jails, for example. Jails are also funded at the county level. And therefore, there are 83 counties in Michigan. Each county has its own jail data management system. So I recently have been trying to figure out how to get a more coherent evidence-based tool to judges in setting bond, right? This is an issue around the country. There's all sorts of ways in which we should be able to do better in pretrial bond setting. And it would be one of the things I wanted to know was how many people are in jail who are being held right now, in which counties are holding the most people. I thought that would be worth knowing, right? How big of a problem is this in Michigan? Is it a bigger problem in some places than other places? No data whatsoever, zero, none. The Department of Corrections used to collect some data from the different county jails around the state. They stopped collecting it about 4 years ago. I think I know why. I asked them to run a couple of to try and run some numbers for me that I was interested in, and I completely crashed the entire state Department of Corrections system. For 2 days, I did it. Yep. And so I was like, okay, I guess I get why. So anyway, my point is, and I can go on and on and on. You see what I'm dealing with. It's an enormous problem in terms of the structural non-statewide system. And the second big problem, which I've already started talking about, is it means our data is crap. We have terrible, terrible data. There are some places that have better data. The Michigan Supreme Court only about 10 years ago tried to start playing a leadership role in collecting data by setting up what we call the Judicial Data Warehouse, which is one place where all of the different case management systems now throughout the state can dump their data. They are not all compliant because, again, it's not a unified system, so I can't make them. We literally have, I think I only have 4 now that are not compliant, and we've tried to be really, really nice and tried to give them stuff, and now we're going the other way. I have a bad cop. I mean, but because, if you're going to collect statewide data, you want it to be statewide data, not, almost statewide data. It's amazing. So as you can see, these two problems, structural and the resulting lack of data, are real. And I don't know what you all how that can be helped, but it has to be acknowledged, I guess, as we think about solving some of these problems. At the same time, we do have pretty good data about what the public wants from our courts. Which I think is a little different than what they want from their lawyers, which might be more what you're focused on if we're talking about legal education, but it's not irrelevant, I think, because the National Center for State Courts does really good data collection and but it just surveys the public very regularly about what the public wants from their courts. And here's what they want. It's there are 3 things. They want their courts to be accountable. They want them to be connected to their communities in meaningful ways. And they want them to be places where they can get their business done efficiently and expeditiously. Fair enough, right? It's kind of what they want from like the rest of government, I think. It's not that different, and so not that surprising. And it seems to be like, even with all of the problems I talked about, that there should be some things we could do to, advance some of those goals. And I think some of the things we have been trying to do are in that direction. So the judicial data warehouse that we've been trying to grow, and I'm trying to bring the last 4 courts into, is going to give us the ability to do to be able to do some things that we can't do without it. If we do finally have some statewide data, we are at the Supreme Court developing a case management system for all of the mental health, drug, and treatment courts throughout the state, which we have a lot. In fact, that turns out to be, and that frankly is one of the ways courts can be connected to their communities in meaningful ways. So those courts have proven extremely successful. We actually have very good data on their success rates. And we are now just taking the lead on providing case management systems, as well as other, I think, tools that will be helpful to any court in the state that wants to run one of those dockets. We're right now just in the beginning stages of putting statewide e-filing in place. Huge problem, given what I just told you about all the different case management systems, because by building a spine that all of those systems can feed into is an enormous problem, but we are on target. We have our first 3 courts on, 3 biggest counties, and we think we have every reason to believe we're going to be able to accomplish that. With the legislature gave us some real money for it. This pretrial risk assessment I am forging forward with, even with my having to build the data as I forge forward with some pilots on it. And then there are private innovators that can bring us marketable products that can deal with some of these problems. And Court Innovations, is JJ going to be here tomorrow, or is he not coming?
I don't think
you don't think he's coming? Yeah. JJ Prescott at the University of Michigan Law School has this startup company that has brought us some fantastic products that, frankly, my colleagues and most of the administrators in the Supreme Court in Lansing were really nervous about. But we're going to let them use our data. We're going to let them into our system. Are they going to, what's going to happen? And real resistance, not from the local courts. The local courts were like, online dispute resolution, bring it to us. You can have our data. You can, come right in. Here's our screen. They were like ready to go. So, and it has turned out to be incredibly effective. Some of these just private innovators have brought us products that have really been well received and are working out well in the places where they've been able to have access. But I have a huge wish list, and here I go. So these are the things I throw out for you to be talking about. All the things I'd like to see done. So you're going to be here all day tomorrow, right? You get this done. Yeah. So the unrepresented litigants. Okay, I'm going to do this whole class on it next year. So maybe I'll figure that out. But there are just the numbers of people, Jim Sandman has talked about it, right? The number of people who have to get their business done in our courts and can't afford lawyers is enormous. Obviously, the My Legal Help website in Michigan is a fantastic, Angela was here earlier, and you guys have worked with them, that's a fantastic resource. It's not covering the landscape, it can't. We have to figure out what more we can do about that. How we can simplify our processes. Courts there have to be ways we can simplify our processes and make it possible for people to, middle income people to do their business without lawyers. I don't mean to put the law schools out of business, I'm sorry, but we have to, it's time. Yeah, I know. But it's time. It's time for us to figure out how more people can do their business without a lawyer. How do we provide tools where people can get their legal business done before they have to go to courts? Let's keep them out of court. Let's get their business done before they have to go to court. How can we use our community partners to keep people from ever having to go to court? And I mean by that libraries, schools, community dispute resolution centers, whatever they are. How do we use those partners better? We regularly hear from people. I do the Judiciary budget every year, so I go testify at the whatever the committee is, the Judiciary Committee. And one of the representatives, I was prepared for questions about the numbers and how I could. He had about 11 questions about. I swear it's on the record. So his bartender had a ticket and she she can't get to court in the morning because something about her shift, and she keeps calling him, and she really wants to go to court at 3 o'clock. Why shouldn't she be able to schedule her court date for 3 o'clock? And I was sort of like, I was like, she should be able to, I think. I don't know. I literally was like, who's the judge? Let me see what I can do. I mean, solving the problem for that guy's bartender isn't really isn't how I can't go about that for the whole state. So, but I do think, why couldn't we have more? So many people are told they have to be in court Friday at 9, and they sit there until 3:30 for their case to be called. Why are we still doing that? How is that possible? I mean, no private business could stay in business if they did that, right? There's no way. Why aren't we doing better with that, with accommodating people who have, work, childcare, all the other things that they have? Should we be able to offer evening court, night court sometimes, or whatever the way is to keep them out of court? There have to be ways that we can accommodate people better. We have to increase what can be done online. Everyone's afraid of, the way online will change, the profession. I'm not. Bring it on. I see all the trouble with trying not to, and bring it on. I think there have to be ways to approach jury management that are far better than what we're doing now in this state. Maybe other states with unified court systems, again, have better processes. Ours are, as you might imagine, 83 different counties have 83 different jury management software systems. But I could imagine a statewide system, that could take off, and people that could replace their systems with one really efficient jury management system. Right now, the amount of time that's wasted when somebody agrees to serve on a jury is ridiculous. It's not a good way to do business. I think, somebody should work on convincing, policymakers that trial court funding should be unified. All right, that's a big one, but putting it on the list. What can we do to promote transparency? I mean, there's just so much more that people should be able to understand about and know about our courts really easily, and they're not. It's really hard to figure things out. When people say they want our courts to be accountable, what can we do to make that to improve that? How can we promote the accountability that we now have? In a way, courts are. I mean, the thing about courts is you don't like your decision, you usually can go to the next court. And we have to explain the decisions we make. I don't think we're doing a great job always promoting some of the accountability that we already have. So some of what I think would be nice would be, how can we do a better job explaining what we do that is accountable? I don't know what that last one was. Anyway, you can see I have there's one more scribble there, and I'm sure it was really important, and if I think of it later, I'll tell you. But those are so you understand what the problems I'm dealing with, but you also understand that I think there's just so much room to make things better, even incrementally, that I'm really glad you're talking about how to do it, and I hope to stay part of it. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.